John the 23rd became Pope during a challenging time. World War II had ended 13 years before, and the world was divided between two military alliances, the Soviet Union and the American-led West. The Soviet bloc suppressed religion with an iron fist. Thousands of Christians were deported to labor camps in Siberia for believing in God, something the communism regime saw as a threat. In the Western Bloc, enormous wealth led to extreme consumerism, giving the impression that religious morality was a limit to happiness.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam. Eminentissimum ac reverendissimum Dominum Angelum Josephum Sante Romane Ecclesiae Cardinale Roncalli.
John the 23rd was 78 years old when he became Pope, and the world was changing quickly. Cardinals elected him because they were looking for a calm pope that would have a short pontificate without complications or surprises. But they were mistaken. Against all odds, John the 23rd started the biggest revolution in the recent history of the Catholic Church. It all began here, inside the Basilica of St. Paul, outside the walls, during a simple prayer service for Christian unity. It was John the 23rd's third month as Pope. It was a prayer service that would have gone mostly unnoticed. Instead, the Pope surprised the world. He announced that he was calling all bishops to Rome to revise and improve the relationship between the Church and the modern world. In other words, he was calling a council.
Society was changing in ways that were leading it away from Christianity, and John the 23rd thought a council would bring Christian tradition into the modern world. It could help lessen the impact of secularization, which was moving really fast at that time.
Due to a scheduling mix-up, the Vatican press office made the announcement just half an hour before the council. So the entire world found out about it even before the cardinals and the Roman Curia.
It was a revolutionary announcement in the Catholic Church, but the Roman Curia wasn't enthusiastic about the idea.
John the 23rd talked about the cardinals' reaction. They were his closest collaborators, but they were also very conservative. He said, I was expecting them to congratulate me, but instead there was an intense silence. It was a church that feared the council. Also, average Christians knew very little about it. In fact, the last council had taken place 100 years before.
I think they understood that if they opened a door, they really didn't know what they would find behind it. They were worried about its effects and what would happen. The idea of a council was difficult to grasp because it was huge.
It's a
story that develops step by step. The Church understood it was the bearer of truth and of God's Word. But it also understood it was no longer the center of the world.
The Vatican prepared the council sessions for almost 3 years. Interestingly, John the 23rd didn't want the Roman Curia to set the agenda. In an unexpected move, he gave bishops absolute freedom, asking them to choose the council's topics.
La singolarità del Vaticano II.
The unique thing about the Second Vatican Council is that, contrary to other councils in history, it was not convened to put an end to a division or heresy. So it was a bit unsettling. Everyone asked, what exactly is this council for?
Questo ha disorientato un po'. Tutti credevano, ma che cos'è un concilio?
La Curia aveva preparato un elenco di domande da inviare.
The Curia had prepared a list of questions to send to bishops, Catholic universities, and religious institutes. But Pope John didn't want that. Instead, he says, they should tell us what they would like to discuss in the council.
Vogliono che si studi nel concilio.
Just a few months later, the Vatican received more than 2,800 proposals. For 2 years, 15 commissions analyzed them, sorting out exactly what points would be discussed by bishops. In all, they proposed 70 documents on church doctrine, an ambitious sum that would soon pose serious problems. More than 4,000 people would participate in the debates. St. Peter's Basilica was the only Vatican site where such a massive meeting could take place. Dozens of technicians prepared the Basilica for the most important ceremony in the modern history of the Catholic Church, the opening of a council. More than 2,500 bishops sat along the pews. There were also about 1,000 experts and special guests. Hundreds of journalists were covering the event. By comparison, nearly 100 years before, only about 750 people took part in the First Vatican Council. Centuries before that, in the 1500s, an estimated 250 bishops attended the Council of Trent.
For the first time, you saw a truly universal church. You saw Asians and Africans. The whole world was there. The church claimed to be universal, but really, it had been a European church. And for the first time, you saw a universal church. There were heads of state and kings. At one time, the emperors were the ones who convened the council. Now, they were only invited guests. So you saw the separation of church and state.
Behind the Iron Curtain, only 25 people from communist-run countries were able to attend the first session. Among them was the unknown auxiliary bishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła. To this day, his passport and visa are kept at the Vatican. For the first time, representatives of other Christian faiths were invited to attend. The Pope appeared before them without his papal crown. Instead, he wore a mitre, like the rest of the bishops.
Pope John's idea to invite those delegates, or observers as they were called, was great. They kept up to date and they participated without voting. But they witnessed all the work within the council. It was the start of a new ecumenical chapter.
L'inizio di una vita ecumenica.
John XXIII personally wrote his opening speech. Despite the solemnity of the moment, he smiled. His tone was refreshing, and it left a strong impression on the council.
Gaudet mater ecclesia, quod singulari divine providentiae numere, optatissimus iam dies illuxit, quo auspice deipara virgine, cuius materna dignitas adie festuritur recalitur.
Many feared the council, but John XXIII talks about optimism and joy. He says there is no place for prophets of gloom, who are always forecasting disaster. He says the council will not question church doctrine, nor will it be taught with attenuation or distortion. Instead of condemning errors, the mission will be to highlight the beauty of Christianity.
La preoccupazione di Papa Giovanni era di saper parlare.
Pope John's biggest worry was conveying his message in a clear, concise way to the modern world. The famous Italian word is aggiornamento. It's a difficult word to translate, but he wanted to be understood without betraying tradition. Because in a way, he was a very traditional man.
It was clear that everything was different than before, but at the same time, no one knew, not even the Pope, how it would turn out. John the 23rd envisioned a council of renewal. But how would bishops from across the world react? What would come of it?
That night, thousands of people gathered under the Pope's window with candles in hand. Their presence was so great that John the 23rd even looked out his window and improvised a few words.
Cari figliuoli, sento le vostre voci. La mia è una voce sola, ma riassume la voce del mondo intero. Qui tutto il mondo è rappresentato. Si direbbe che persino la luna si è affrettata stasera, osservatela in alto, a guardare a questo spettacolo. Che neppure la Basilica di San Pietro, che ha 4 secoli di storia, non ha mai potuto contemplare.
This is the atmosphere the council began in, with great expectations, but also hesitation and fear of how things would turn out. The Church was about to open a delicate chapter in its history. The Pope thought the process would take a few months. In the end, it took 3 years. They were 3 unforgettable years for those who witnessed them firsthand.
Ero dunque penna francese e facevo un po' di tramite.
I was working in the French office at the Vatican's Secretariat of State. Sometimes I would go to the council meetings to pass on messages from the Pope.
Per trasmettere qualche messaggio del Papa.
Io ho partecipato nella
I took part in the last session in 1965. It was 2 weeks after my ordination as bishop, and I was 32 years old.
avevo 32 anni.
I was working for ANSA, the Italian news agency. Thanks to the council, I stayed here permanently to cover the Vatican.
I was a private theologian for a French bishop.
I was working for the Vatican's Clergy Discipline Commission, which prepared the Presbyterorum Ordinis decree. I was the secretary's assistant, so basically the subsecretary.
It was Friday, October 12th, when the council held its first session. It lasted only 20 minutes due to an unexpected turn of events.
La finestra dava sulla piazza San Pietro.
My window faced St. Peter's Square. We saw all the bishops arrive for the first session in St. Peter's Basilica. They closed the doors and we went back to work. Then half an hour later I hear, "Come." We went to the window and saw all the bishops walking out. We couldn't believe our eyes. We thought, what happened?
Stupore, ma cos'è successo?
I was covering the meeting that day, and I wanted to see everything. So I snuck into the basilica. At one point I hear, "Extra omnes! Everyone must leave the basilica." But I was halfway inside. So I simply couldn't leave. I was scared someone would see me. So I hid in a confessional and heard everything in Latin. I understood some of the disagreement among bishops, so later I was able to explain what had happened.
There was an incident. Several bishops and cardinals wanted to review who had been assigned to each commission, since that had all been decided before.
Organizers expected the first session to go smoothly, but it didn't. In theory, bishops were to vote on who would be assigned to each commission. But in practice, the Vatican drafted its own proposals and wanted immediate approval. Many refused to vote because they wanted to get to know each candidate before making a decision, since members would in essence write the Council's official documents.
Con buon senso, ma dice il Papa non ci ha fatto venire
With all due respect, they said, the Pope did not call us to Rome to approve something that's already been done. We're coming from all over the world. And well, that was true. It was the first time a council was truly global. They said, we need a few days to get to know each other, to make decisions and to weigh our options.
Fare conoscenza e fare le scelte che siano ponderate.
This argument was accepted and welcomed. A few days later, bishops and cardinals personally chose all 16 members of each commission. But challenges continued during their first debate. Bishops were set to discuss a document on the Bible and additional sources of divine revelation. The same French cardinal who opposed the Vatican's original commission proposal said he didn't like the Vatican's approach. Another 6 cardinals agreed with him. This led to a heated debate. Discouragement rose when they couldn't reach an agreement.
The draft on the divine revelation proposed 2 parallel paths, tradition and the Holy Scriptures. But some considered the text harsher than the position of the Council of Trent, which actually left the door open to Protestants by not excluding them completely.
When it was time to vote on the document, there were 822 votes in favor and 1,368 against. The disparity was high, but not high enough to cancel the document. John the 23rd asked them to start over and prepare a new text on the same topic. The commission was looking for new ideas. It decided to reach out to the young assistant of a German cardinal from Cologne. The name of that young theologian was Joseph Ratzinger. The final document emerged years later, becoming one of the most cherished documents on the Bible, the dogmatic constitution, Dei Verbum.
One of the cardinals who opposed the original draft was Joseph Frings from Cologne. His critique was probably prepared by his assistant, who happened to be Father Joseph Ratzinger.
Optimists saw mistakes as lessons that led to a more efficient work method. Pessimists saw it was proof that the council was a bad idea.
No one expected these problems. They came about spontaneously as discussions were underway. But this is exactly what gave life to the council.
After the initial optimism, discouragement began to seep in. Bishops lacked common ground, and they had a hard time connecting all the proposals. A cardinal from Brussels, Leo Sunens, told the Pope the council was addressing too many unrelated topics. Everything from the liturgy to the mass media. The cardinal feared the random discussions would lead nowhere. John the 23rd had a reputation for being practical. He asked the cardinal to find a specific theme for the council, and he did. It was a decision that completely changed the tone of the debates. The Archbishop of Milan, Giovanni Battista Montini, played a key role in all this. With the Pope's permission, Cardinal Sunens suggested this idea. Instead of discussing dozens of topics, bishops would focus on 2 main themes. First, the inner church. Secondly, its relationship with the world. Their response said it all. A loud round of applause.
Ricordo come se fosse ieri. Chiesa di Gesù Cristo.
I remember it as if it was yesterday. Church of Jesus Christ, what do you say about yourself? And it became the Church ad intra. Then the bishops still spoke a bit of Latin. The Church ad intra and the Church ad extra. These themes became the 2 great documents from the council. Lumen Gentium was about the Church. What was the Church about? The Church's ministry, the work of the Holy Spirit, the people of God and its structure. And then the other was Gaudium et Spes, the Church within the modern world.
Gaudium et Spes su la Chiesa nel mondo odierno.
The council had a central theme, and it began to follow a productive work rhythm. But then there was another setback. John the 23rd was diagnosed with a malignant tumor.
At the end of the first session, the Pope already knew he had cancer. He said he was seeing the gates of death coming closer, but he was always able to transmit a strong sense of hope to the council, especially to its lead participants.
The Pope died 7 months after. On June 3, 1963, the bells rang throughout the Eternal City. He passed away without witnessing the completion of the Second Vatican Council.
The most important thing he did was that he didn't impose on the council. He simply gave them an idea of what the council should be about and why it should be different from others. It wasn't about dogmas or condemnations, but instead, it was a pastoral, positive, and ecumenical council. Its purpose was to bring the church to the people. He was able to express all this without forcing his message.
Lui ha detto tutto questo senza però forzare l'episcopato.
With his death, the council was temporarily called off. With so many challenges, perhaps his successor would decide to cancel it altogether. Within a few days, the world's cardinals made it to Rome for the conclave. Soon they would have to make a critical choice, one that would affect the council and, in essence, the future of the Catholic Church. On June 19th, 80 cardinals walked into the Sistine Chapel. It was the largest conclave in the Church's history. Cardinals were anxious to vote. Within 48 hours, the Church had a pope.
Habemus papam. Sancte Romane Ecclesiae Cardinale Montini.
Council supporters felt at ease. They had elected a pope who wanted to continue with the council and with its mission.
Paul VI was elected pope. He was a strong candidate who contradicted the unofficial conclave rule, enter a pope, leave a cardinal. He was known for his openness to the council and its new dynamic. In fact, as a cardinal, he had approved Cardinal Sunan's suggestions of giving the council specific themes.
At the end of September 1963, Paul VI inaugurates the council's second session. Just 9 months before, he took part in the meetings as a cardinal, but now he was the pope, and he addressed the crowd as a leader. He was neither a silent witness nor a simple observer. He felt the need to uphold his responsibility before the Church, but above all, before God.
Salvete vos, via nobis invitati, libentes confluxistis, ut unum nobiscum in altra interessitis concilii ecumenici Vaticani II sessione.
In a memorable speech, he points out the council's objectives. First on the list is improving the quality and frequency of religious practice among Catholics. Second, to reform the structures of the Church. Third, to engage in ecumenical dialogue with other Christians. And fourth, to connect with the modern world. He also reduces the number of discussion topics from 70 to 17. He adds that all documents must be approved unanimously, and he names 4 cardinals to lead and coordinate the debates on his behalf. Another important addition was that of integrating females, 10 nuns and 13 laywomen.
The laywomen were the presidents of female associations. There were 2 war widows, because the war was still fairly recent.
This female presence marked a new chapter for the council.
Mio amico filosofo Jean Guitton, anche molto amico di Paolo.
My friend, the philosopher Jean Guitton, who was also very good friends with Paul VI, said, after the audacity John the 23rd showed in starting the council, intelligence and expertise were needed to actually have it bear fruit.
Tornare, arrivare a terra.
Ha concepito il suo ruolo come un polo di unità.
He decides his role will be one of unity, so he tries to create an environment of dialogue. He wanted a unanimous voice among council participants.
A creare l'unanimità dei padri conciliari.
Ha avuto sempre il senso.
He believed the council wasn't about a parliamentary assembly with a separation between the majority and a minority. Instead, he wanted the minority to be able to speak out as well.
La minoranza possa parlare anche.
Back then, Cardinal Cartier was a young theologian who helped his bishop analyze some of the council's texts. Like him, there were hundreds of other experts and assistants who gave theological assessments. Others translated speeches in Latin.
In
the meetings I took part in, there was a rather large presence of French and Germans. We had big names like Congar, Danielou, and de Lubac. I remember Karl Rahner was there as well.
Ratzinger was probably the author of 2 speeches that Frings gave during the council. He also wrote a rebuttal speech against Cardinal Ottaviani, who served as the prefect for the Holy Office, which Cardinal Ratzinger eventually led.
Questi consiglieri hanno spesso preparato.
These counselors prepared the speeches bishops gave in the meetings. I think they had a very important role, certainly much bigger than what we can imagine, because they were the ones who truly gave bishops the words to express their ideas.
Ai padri per poter esprimere le loro convinzioni.
At the very beginning, Paul VI told them only unanimously approved documents would be accepted. Consensus was key. But as the Pope would soon learn, this wasn't an easy task.
He was determined to avoid a division between liberals and conservatives. He was always determined to find a middle ground to keep the Church united.
Ha fatto la sua prima enciclica, Ecclesiam Suam.
He wrote his first encyclical, Ecclesiam Suam, on dialogue. By specifically choosing the word dialogue, he was sending a clear message to the pastoral council. A Christian attitude should be based on dialogue and not on fighting.
Había dos tendencias, sí. Una un poco extremistas.
The council had 2 separate visions that were somewhat extremist, but in the end they brought out the best in each other. One was loyalty to the faith, so recognizing the encompassing and unquestionable role of tradition, but it excluded a series of necessary reforms, not really in the content of the faith, but rather in ways of communicating it. The second tendency was progressive, extremely progressive. That vision included new paths towards ecumenism, new paths toward liturgical reform and engagement with the modern world. But the problem was that in pursuing those new paths, the true message of the gospel was lost.
There were those that were still under communist regimes, and here, the church was in survival mode. There were those on a missionary level, where the church still had to be built. And there were bishops that were educated in ecclesiastical universities, still with an extremely clerical view of the church. So more than progressives and conservatives, there was diversity in the sensibilities of cultural preparation and experience. With
time, dialogue, and patience, those 2 extreme ideologies began falling into place. Slowly, they began complementing each other. In the end, all the council documents were almost unanimously approved.
The first debate to bear fruit was on the liturgy. Bishops wanted to make it easier for worshipers to take part in ceremonies without corrupting its sacredness. That text would eventually become the Sacrosanctum Concilium Constitution, the first of the Council's great documents. With the new norms, Mass could be celebrated out loud, and instead of Latin, it could be celebrated in a country's respective language. It also allowed greater variety in the use of Bible readings. Unfortunately, the new norms weren't always respected.
La riforma liturgica in grandi linee è stata buona.
Liturgical reform by large part was good. So, more attention to the Holy Scriptures, more attention to the Christian community, even the use of local languages. This is a good thing. Nothing against Latin, but you can't deny that a celebration in the language that people understand can boost participation and can make the liturgy seem not just for the clerics at the altar, but something that applies to all people, clerics and lay people.
The changes to the liturgy were not carried out well, so the transition was very problematic. Maybe because bishops didn't supervise it well enough.
Some things were wrongly done in the name of reform. In fact, in time, some of these reforms have been corrected, especially those dealing with important aspects like the adoration of the Eucharist.
When the liturgy text was approved, new momentum followed. There was growing energy as the second document was addressed, but in a way, it was much more complicated. The Lumen Gentium Constitution, or Light of the Peoples, revealed the face of the Church to the world.
The Lumen Gentium is fundamental for the Council because from this document, all other documents are born.
Within Lumen Gentium, the Church is restructured. So it's not that we're dealing with another church. The dogmas are the same, the laws are the same, but it's a new church.
With the modern world, the role of the bishops had to be defined, especially in the governance of the Church. It's a term known as episcopal collegiality. The Council regulated episcopal conferences and created the Synod of Bishops to occasionally bring together bishops from across the world to Rome. They were to help the Pope in the governance of the Church, but this triggered serious problems and polarizing debates.
Una minoranza ha visto in questa presentazione come...
A minority saw this new model as something that diminished the Pope's primacy. There was fear that the Pope's role within the Church would be reduced. For this reason, in a way, they tried to block the approval of this Lumen Gentium chapter.
L'approvazione di questi capitoli della Lumen Gentium.
This group feared the document could trump the Pope's authority, a term known as conciliarism. The minority group was small, yet highly relevant. It included about 20 cardinals, various bishops, and the superiors of 12 religious institutes. Even though the document was near final approval, critics wrote to Paul VI expressing their concerns. In a very dramatic, almost threatening way, they reminded him that he was commissioned to look after the faith and Catholic orthodoxy. They warned about the dangers of weakening the Pope's jurisdiction. They feared the Church would become an entity where no one had complete authority and no one had the last word.
After all of this, Paul VI issued a previous note in which he defined what collegiality is and the relationship between the College of Bishops and the head of the college, which is the Pope.
Lumen Gentium became an extremely important document because it addressed other issues as well. In addition to the role of the Pope and of bishops, it marks the very first document to describe the role lay people play in the Church and in society.
Lo más importante del Vaticano II es la llamada universal a la santidad y al apostolado.
The most important outcome of the Second Vatican Council is outlining the universal call to holiness and to the apostolate. This universal call is for all the baptized. It refers to the right and even duty to seek holiness. So shaping our lives to the needs of the gospel and the message of Christ, to be apostles and spread the message of salvation which God sent to us through Jesus Christ.
Il laico, il cristiano, deve essere un cittadino a 100%.
The document states that a layperson, a Christian, has to be a full citizen who doesn't separate civic responsibilities from religious duties. If Christians draw a clear division between the two, they are not good Christians, and maybe they won't go to heaven. It states that lay people must not wait for priests to give them answers on issues like the family, culture, politics, professional life, or work.
La famiglia, la cultura, la politica, la professione, il lavoro.
The Lumen Gentium Constitution served as a point of reference so that the Church could reflect on its relationship with the modern world at a time when the two were moving away from each other at an alarming rate. During this same time, Paul VI became the first pope in modern times to travel abroad. Through his visits, he was able to see the realities Christians face in different parts of the world. In a way, these communities introduced themselves to the Vatican and vice versa. These trips had a direct influence on the Council. In 1964, the Pope traveled to the Holy Land. While on neutral territory, he met with the leader of the Orthodox Church, Patriarch Athenagoras. It was a way to heal the mistrust and tension that divided both churches since 1054. It was his first trip outside Rome. Upon his return, the people of the Eternal City filled the streets to give him a hero's welcome. A year and a half later, as the Council discussed conflicts and wars, Paul VI traveled to New York to deliver a speech on peace before the United Nations General Assembly.
Nous faisons nôtre aussi la voix des pauvres, des déshérités, des malheureux, de ceux qui aspirent à la justice, à la dignité de vivre, à la liberté, au bien-être et au progrès.
He also met with U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. Their meeting was informal, but it marked the first time an American president met with a pope. The Council's popularity grew. Many started mailing in their own proposals. One key idea had been submitted years before under John the 23rd. It came from France, from a non-Catholic.
C'è stata in Francia una bella personalità.
There was a great Jewish man in France, Jules Isaac, who had lost his wife and children at Auschwitz. He understood that to overcome this situation, a Hebrew-Christian friendship was needed. The rector at the San Luigi dei Francesi, Monsignor Barron, introduced him to Pope John. He asked the Pope to include a statement against anti-Semitism in the Council. This request is the seed that gave life to the text that condemns anti-Semitism. Pope John received it with great enthusiasm.
Papa Giovanni l'ha ricevuto con entusiasmo.
Not much time had passed since the end of World War II. And the wounds of the Holocaust were far too deep to not be addressed by the Council. Once again, the process was not as easy as the Pope had hoped. Some were hesitant to include a document with political undertones.
Alcuni vescovi del Medio Oriente
Several bishops from the Middle East were against it. They said, if we say this, it will be interpreted as a sign of support for the State of Israel. But that was not the intention. The document talked about suffering, anti-Semitism, and Jewish persecution.
The Council refused to leave this statement out. The Vatican called on its diplomats to explain the text abroad. In the end, bishops also mentioned other religions in the final document, making the Nostra Aetate a highly eloquent document. True, the Jewish authorities and those who followed their lead pressed for the death of Christ. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all the Jews, without distinction, then alive, nor against the Jews of today. The Jews should not be presented as rejected or accursed by God, as if this followed from the Holy Scriptures.
Per fare questo, dire questo,
so to carry this out, the Council decided to address other religions. Bishops started talking about Islam. Now, keep in mind that absolutely no one thought about what would happen so many years later. They focused on the positive aspects of Islam, like prayers, penitence, and almsgiving. So it was an official recognition of other religions.
Quindi un riconoscimento anche delle altre religioni.
And we didn't stop with Islam. Just after this decision, the bishops of India came out and said, hey, in India we have Muslims, but the biggest religion there is Hinduism, not Islam. So we talked about Hinduism, Buddhism, China, and all the Middle East. We talked about all of these and also African religions. This is how the very idea of interreligious dialogue was born.
At the same time, the Council approved another revolutionary document. With the Dignitatis Humanae, the Catholic Church recognized the freedom of worship of every person, including non-Catholics. This had its challenges. Bishops from countries where Catholicism is the official religion were against it. They feared they would have to give up privileges. Others feared that recognizing the freedom of worship would lead people to think that all religions were equal. But despite the obstacles, the Council realized that freedom of worship had to be protected. If God gave freedom to all people, religion could not be imposed.
The Church had experienced discrimination. For example, some had prevented the Church from opening schools, so it had been denied freedom of worship. The Church understood the value of this.
Quell'approccio di Vaticano II, perché quell'approccio comincia col vedere che la persona.
The approach of the Second Vatican Council began by highlighting that each human being has a God-given dignity. This dignity is the base for freedom of conscience and worship. No one should use force to impose their religion on another person. Religion is proposed, not imposed.
La religione viene proposta, non imposta.
The Council approved its most ambitious document the very last day, the Gaudium et Spes Constitution. It was a message directed to the entire world, Catholics and non-Catholics. The text put an end to the era of condemnation and mistrust among believers and non-believers.
The Church, for the very first time, says, I stand in solidarity with mankind. I go and walk with mankind. It leaves its centuries-old sacred walls behind, some of which were necessary because of enemies that attacked the Church. But now the Church says, I walk with mankind.
The entire text of Gaudium et Spes was written so that those who are far from the Church can understand what the Church is all about.
La Chiesa anche
The Church does not live enclosed within the Vatican museums, but it goes out to Via della Conciliazione, then Paris, in New Delhi, in Dubai, Lagos, Abuja, Nairobi, Caracas, and London. And that Church appreciates human beings. It appreciates the family and society. One cannot say it's a pessimistic Church.
That day, the Pope and the leader of the Orthodox Church, Patriarch Athenagoras, lifted their mutual excommunications that had divided Christians for over 1,000 years. With this gesture, the council came to a close. After 3 years of countless debates, 16 documents were approved, introducing a new chapter in the history of the Catholic Church. Paul VI concluded the Second Vatican Council at St. Peter's Square. Thousands of people watched as he announced that through this council, the Church had denounced errors, but mostly it had called on Catholics to show respect and affection for all people.
Dichiariamo finito e chiuso il Concilio Ecumenico Vaticano II.
I remember the beautiful closing ceremony. It was beautiful, and the sun was shining. But it wasn't just the sun that shined. The Church had a new beginning.
Whereas the Council's first session in St. Peter's Basilica was closed to the public, the closing ceremony was out in the open in St. Peter's Square. The day was slightly windy, but it was beautiful. Symbolically, the Church was outside. It was meeting with the entire world. In fact, Pope Paul VI said during his speech that no one is an enemy of the Church. The Church wants to reunite with all mankind, men and women.
Quelli messaggi a diverse persone lette da cardinali.
The messages cardinals read were beautiful. They were messages to different people. So to the youth, to women, to men of science and art, to politicians, it was beautiful. It gave the impression that you were a part of history, something you couldn't fully comprehend at the time.
Che uno non capisce completamente.
This enthusiasm was followed by challenges. Actually implementing the new norms accurately turned out to be tougher than getting them approved.
It takes a lot of time to go from theory to practice, but the Lord always sends us saints and institutions that embody the Church's message. They live out ideas that up until that moment had been only theories in theology courses, seminaries, universities, or doctoral dissertations.
It's very significant that this council had a pastoral outlook, but ironically its weakness comes in applying these pastoral points.
Some Catholics, who were perhaps too progressive, tried to apply the council's documents in a very liberal way. Then, when they saw that it couldn't be done, they said the council's norms had been betrayed. What followed were complaints that the council had not been fully applied. They said this still needed to happen because its progressive interpretation had not been given a chance.
Unfortunately, those tendencies from several anarchical groups with theological undertones or groups with sociological or political messages, many of which were solely political, have caused a lot of harm because there has been a post-council crisis. We have lost vocations because of this, and they've damaged loyalty to the Church, which is a fundamental virtue. To be faithful to the faith, be faithful to the hierarchy, to the Pope, the bishops, to be loyal to the vocation itself.
Despite some setbacks, Those 3 years of heated debates and disagreements helped the church. It prepared it for the support it would give to men and women with modern-day challenges, and also to face the 1968 revolution. Ultimately, it marked the path of the church for generations to come.
Se non ci fosse stato quell'ottimismo, la Chiesa, 3 anni dopo, chiuso il concilio.
This optimism was key for the church. 3 years later, the 1968 liberal wave took off, which actually had positive ideals at first. Then, in many ways, it turned into something degenerate. The movement attacked any kind of authority, or any type of institution. Since it was also against the church, some convents were left empty, and priests decided to leave. But if it had not been for these tools that were given to the church, the impact of 1968 would have been a lot more severe.
La Chiesa avrebbe subito molto di più l'impatto del 68.
The council turned John the 23rd into a revolutionary pope. Even though it didn't make any doctrinal changes, it did mark a clear cultural change. The church would still face problems, but now it had the proper instruments to deal with them. Major initiatives like World Youth Day, the church's historic apology for its past wrongdoings, and a peace vigil with the world's religions in Assisi. Without the council, they would have been unfathomable. Over the years, it achieved its main purpose. The church was able to communicate its message to the world, and the world got to see the face of the church. And even now, as it moves forward, the council's teachings still have an irreplaceable role.